The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
Chicken head, chicken feet, chicken eggs is all I eat.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Friday, and that means only one thing. What we've been doing here every Friday for about the last year now, believe it or not. Bucket full of chicken X. This is the show where Vince Russo speaks about everything on his mind and tries to stay as far away from professional wrestling as possible. However, today I want to open up with something I just read online that I think is huge and says a lot. And you really had to be working inside of TNA to understand just the importance of this story. And I just read before I came online that Vice President of TNA Impact Wrestling, Andy Barton, is leaving the company. And listen, I got to tell you, for me, honestly, this for me seals the fate of TNA. This to me, it goes beyond the writing is on the wall. This really goes to, there have already been some concrete decisions made regarding the future of TNA. And I'll tell you why. Andy Barton has been with TNA, the company from day one, 13 years, but it goes back even further than that. Prior to TNA, Dixie Carter was running a PR company out of the same office in Nashville, and Andy Barton was working with Dixie at that time. So this is an individual that goes back nearly 20 years with Dixie Carter. Listen, he was the right-hand man. Those two were in the office. I think probably more than anybody that ever set foot in TNA, Dixie Carter trusted Andy Barton more than anybody. Like I said, this literally was her right arm. This was the kind of guy that you would say you'd never expect him to leave the company. Now that he has, like I said, this speaks volumes for me and what the future of TNA may be. But listen, I'm going to say this too. I didn't have a good relationship with Andy Barton. Him and I never got along. I think a lot of it had to do with I was New York and he was Nashville, Tennessee. I think I rubbed him the wrong way. I think he rubbed me the wrong way. It certainly was nothing personal. I'm not going to sit here and say, anything bad about the guy or any decisions he made or anything like that. But I will admit we didn't get along. But, regardless, this was a guy that was there long before I was and long after I left. For him to give his notice, it's that tells me a lot about the current situation involving TNA. I was talking to Jeff today, and I have to urge you to do this. And Jeff and I hit a little bit of on this in Lions, Tigers, Bears, and Dirt. Just about, and we always talk about it, the failure of wrestling to evolve, to come into 2015. The fact that it's so behind its time when it comes to today's society that if at the beginning of every show, and I mean this as an absolute shoot, if there was a disclaimer at the beginning of every wrestling show that said this show is a parody of the professional wrestling business, then it would be cool. I think everything would be okay. I think I'd watch the show. If the show was presented as a parody of wrestling, I think I'd watch the show. But here's where I really have to laugh because, if you want to see this with your own two eyes, I recommend you do this. Last night, I was killing time. I missed the 8:00 episode of Wayward Pines, so I had to wait till the 12 o'clock on demand. So I had about 4 hours to kill. I was down on baseball because the Giants blew another game, so I didn't feel like watching any baseball. So I got on the computer and I started watching, I'll be honest with you, what makes me happy. And what makes me happy is like old music, old concert footage. I even started looking at some old interviews. I'll give you an example. Music-wise last night, I was looking at, Boston, from the Meadowlands in 1979. I was looking at, early Bengals and late Bengals. I was looking at early Go-Go's and late Gurgles. I was looking at, Bachman Turner Overdrive when they were in their prime. I was a big fan of BTO growing up. I was looking at some early Meatloaf concert footage. One of the greatest entertainers of that time. I was probably a 16-year-old kid when Meatloaf was at the peak of his career. Nobody entertained like this man. Then I started watching some interviews. I watched Paul Stanley absolutely bury Peter Criss in some kind of an interview. Then I watched Ace Frehley, who absolutely buried Paul, Gene, and Tommy Thayer. So I was really, really, really hitting it old school last night, watching a lot of this stuff. And Simon and Garfunkel, I was watching some old Simon and Garfunkel footage and just really enjoying myself. Joan Jett. I love watching this stuff. Journey, Steve Perry Journey, not fake Journey. And I remember my daughter telling me like the day before that Rihanna's new video had come out. Bitch Better Have My Money. So now keep in mind, I had just watched all this old school stuff for about an hour, going from video to video with a huge smile on my face. I remembered my daughter told me about the Rihanna video that I had to go watch. So I go watch, Bitch Better Have My Money, and there's an explicit version. So, of course, you got to go to the explicit version when Rihanna is involved because you just don't know what she's going to do next. So this music video comes on that literally is like a 7-minute short film. And, I got to be honest with you, I was very proud because my girl Riri directed this. And I think she did a really good job directing it. But this is a 7-minute video where like everything happens, and of course with Bitch Better Have My Money, there's offensive language, there's nudity involved, there's violence involved, there's everything you can ever imagine. But, at the end of the day, when I look at things like this, I'm looking at it from a creative aspect. And it was just, very creative. I thought it was well done. I enjoyed it. You see, even though I am a Christian guy, I can enjoy stuff like that, and I do. But anyway, looking at those concert videos from the 70s and the 80s, and then fast forward to 2015 and watching a music video in this form, it is unbelievable just how far we have come, when it comes to the early days of MTV and what everybody was seeing to the music that artists are releasing today, especially, like I said, when there are, videos involved and music videos. I mean, it's almost comical if you go back and you look at them back to back. Now, with that being said, go back and look at your wrestling from the 70s. Go back and look at your wrestling from the 80s. Go back and look at your wrestling from your 90s. I don't care what promotion. It doesn't matter. WWE, WCW, USWA, ECW, whatever you want to look at. Go look at that footage. Now, pair that up to what we saw from wrestling this week, minus Lucha Underground, because Lucha Underground is not wrestling, it's a television show. So compare that to WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor. 70s, 80s, 90s product to what we saw this week. Same exact thing. Nothing has changed whatsoever. And, when you put it in that kind of contrast, it's so easy to see what the problem with wrestling is. But, here's the situation. And I was talking to Glenn Gilberti this week, And man, I got to tell, here's why I love Glenn. Because every time I talk to him, he's got these new points and these good points and these points that really make you think, and you walk away from it saying, man, he's dead on. And what Glenn basically said is, he goes, look, Vince, he goes, the same people that were involved in wrestling, through the Attitude Era, when the shows were great, WWE was great, Nitro was great, those same people, 20 years later, they're still involved in the same product. They're still watching wrestling every single week. So he basically said, Vince, they don't know a good show from a bad show. He said, in the meantime, people like you and me, casual wrestling fans, we stopped watching the show. We don't watch wrestling anymore. We left, which explains why you've gone from 8 million people to 3.5 million people. And Glenn basically said, those are the people they need to speak to. They need to speak to the people that are no longer watching the product, the people that were enjoying it, 98, 99, 2000. And the people today, show them today's product because they don't watch it anymore, and then ask them, why wouldn't you watch this? The answers would be simple. The answers would be what every one of us are saying every single week. And if you want to know about evolving the business, look at Rihanna's "Bitch Better Have My Money" and put it next to Madonna's "Borderline." You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And the fact that they can't see this, Jeff Lane told me, I don't watch Impact. And he told me that they opened with like a 20-minute, wrestling match with a 6-man tag that really nobody cared about. And, again, then the numbers come in and the numbers are horrible. And yes, I'll give it to them. It has something to do with being 4th of July week. Let's assume everybody in the family went to Cape Canaveral. Let's assume that. But even with that being said, okay, that's enough about wrestling. Let's move on to other things. I want to talk about a couple of things in the news. I want to talk about first Scott Disick. You guys know Scott Disick from Keeping Up with the Kardashians. He's Courtney's, they're not married, so he's a boyfriend. They got the 2 kids together now, yada, yada, yada. And, Scott is a drinker, and, he grew up from a rich family with a silver spoon in his mouth. The guy has a lot of money, thinks his what doesn't stink, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, I was on TMZ. And they caught pictures of Scott out with a former girlfriend. Her name is Chloe Bartoli, and she is a celebrity stylist. And Disick's on the beach with his ex-girlfriend, and they have the pictures. He's rubbing her back, she's rubbing his back. There was definitely, without a question, something going on. So, here's the thing with a guy like Scott Disick. Listen, the guy's not an idiot. If you watch the show, he's not an idiot. The guy knows, as anybody in that Kardashian clan knows, wherever they go, cameras are going to follow. So they're going to get, when they're out in public, unless they're in a room and the door is locked, and who knows, there might even be a nanny cam in a teddy bear somewhere. Who knows? But the fact is, if you're out in public, pictures are going to be taken. So there's one or two things going on. Either this knucklehead absolutely, positively wants to get caught, wants Courtney to see these pictures. Bro, you know how when a guy wants to get out of a relationship and can't get out of a relationship, he'll do things so hopefully the girl gets smartened up and she'll be the one to do the dirty work and dump him. I mean, the gig. So either that's going on, which is a hard pill to swallow, because this isn't just his girlfriend. This is the mother of his 2 children. So, it goes a little deeper than that. But then the other side of the coin is, okay, is this another publicity stunt for Keeping Up with the Kardashians? In season 29, episode 33, is Courtney going to accuse Scott of seeing these pictures on TMZ, yada, yada, yada. But either way you look at it, anyway, it's ridiculously sad. it's sad as a shoot that if the guy has 2 kids at home and he's out on the beach with his ex-girlfriend, rubbing her and doing this gimmick, the whole thing. That's sad, number one. Sad number 2 is if it's all a setup for fodder, so you have it for your television show. I don't know which is worse, but I'm tending to believe that he wants these pictures to be seen. He wants it to get back to her, because let me tell you, if this isn't a part of the show and if this is a shoot, then she's absolutely an imbecile to stay with this guy, especially since he's got 2 small kids at home and he's on the beach with Hoochie Coochie Bartoli over here. What a war is going on in the press now between the girls next door, Kendra and Holly Madison, Kendra Wilkinson, Holly Madison. As you know, these were the 2 girls that lived with Hef in the mansion for all these years. Hef had 3 girlfriends at the time. It was Kendra, it was Holly, and the third one I can't remember her name. They did the television show on the E! Network. Yada, yada, yada. Since then, all 3 girls left the house. Hef married a different 15-year-old. But now Holly Madison has written a book and she's dropped the dime on everybody. She's dropped the dime on Hef. I was reading an article yesterday. She dropped the dime on Chris Angel. And she dropped the dime on Kendra. I mean, she just, you talk about a tell-all. This was a tell-all. So now Kendra, of course, is fighting back. Her big comeback. She's going to Hef's defense, yada, yada, yada. I have trouble with this. And I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong. So that's why I'm just going to lay it out here anyway. As you know, I wrote 2 books. When I first started writing my Forgiven book, I was not a Christian at the time. And I started writing the book, and it was a scathing tell-all. Scathing. Listen, if you guys out there think, that I don't have nice things to say about certain people, and which a lot of what I state is my opinion, and a lot of what I state, I'll be honest with you, is to be funny. I made the comment today on the earliest show that if you gave, John Gaborik and Dixie Carter and Jeff Jarrett a 100-piece children's jigsaw puzzle to put together, that they couldn't, even if you gave them 24 hours. I say that in jest. I say that in a joke. That's not mean-spirited, because what I'm trying to get at is, if I wanted to say mean-spirited stuff about people, do you not think, after 20 years, I don't have a suitcase full of that stuff? And you don't think that I know things about certain individuals that I would never repeat? Because I just wouldn't. I wouldn't publicly say certain things about certain people that I know to be a fact. And first and foremost, even when I wasn't saved, what's always in the back of my mind is, these people have families. They have kids, who look up to them, and you don't want their kids reading stuff like that and everything. It's an entire mess. Me saying that they can't put a jigsaw puzzle together is one thing. Me telling some truthful stories that'll really hit home and cause a lot of controversy is something completely different. Then, of course, once I became a Christian, I completely rewrote the book. And I didn't rip anybody in the book. I didn't cut promos on anybody in the book. If I beat up anybody, it was myself. So it's like, I look at this Holly Madison, and you got to look at the facts. You got to look at that when Holly was on The Girls Next Door, which ran for a couple of seasons on E! I'm sure Holly Madison was getting a nice paycheck, from that television show. Now, when that show ended, I know Holly was doing some work in Vegas. She was hosting some shows. She was still making money. But, when you're on a weekly television show and you go from that secure money, that weekly money that is going to come in, and you're trying to do odd jobs here and there to make up for it, it ain't going to happen. So the fact of the matter is, if Holly Madison writes a tell-all, Is she going to sell the book and make money? Because that's what it's all about. Here's the thing. Let me tell you right now, as a writer and a guy that told you he wrote 2 books, people that write books, where all kinds of dirt is shared and gossip is shared and they put it all out there. And, they're being honest in their minds. I'm not saying they're making anything up or they're lying, because they're not. It's what they lived and they're putting it out there. You'll hear every single person say, oh, it was therapeutic. It helped me get through a very hard time, putting it down on paper. That's absolutely BS. They're doing it for the money. They're doing it because if there are a number of juicy stories in there, the book is going to sell. It's that simple. I had to make the decision in my mind when I wrote my books that one of my biggest goals in life was to be published. That was probably like my biggest goal. My goals had nothing to do with wrestling or ratings of a wrestling show. I wanted to be a published author. So to me, I could have cared less if my book sold 1 copy. It didn't matter to me. The fact that, I had a bound book in my hand, that was going to be in a Barnes & Noble, that you were going to be able to buy online, I was a published author. That was a big goal for me. But a lot of people, they don't do it. They don't do it for those reasons. At the end of the day, they do it for the money. And so I don't know. If Holly Madison needs to make a living, that's what she's going to do to make a living. I could write a 3rd book tomorrow. And I could write a 3rd book about stories I've never told before that would be all over every website and headlines all over the place. And as badly as I'm in a situation where, I need to be making a little bit more money. I'm not working for a wrestling organization. I still choose not to do that. That's not in me to do that. And now and then, I'll slip up and I'll say something I regretted saying or this, but you know what? I'm a human being and like that's going to happen. But to sit down consciously and write a book where it's a burial, that's not in me. But like I said, on the other side of the coin, if that's what she's got to do to earn money, then that's what she's got to do to earn money. And that's that. And speaking of earning money, there are worse ways to earn money than burying people. There was a story on TMZ today that is just, it's not unbelievable, because things like this happen. But supposedly, if you follow the Bobby Christina story, and, Bobby Christina is the child of, the late Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown, there was some circumstances that, we still don't really know the facts about, but, in a hotel room, she had too much of whatever, face down in a tub for God knows how long. She becomes brain dead. The family leaves her on life support for a very long time, even though there's little or no hope that she will ever be able to recover. Finally, after a long period of time, they make the decision that they're probably going to let nature take its course. So now supposedly out in Hollywood, there's a picture floating around of a Bobby Christina on what could be her deathbed. Somebody literally in the hospital took a picture of her and are now trying to sell it to tabloids. And the rumor is that it was a family member. And listen, I have to ask you, sometimes you really have to ask yourself, like, how low could somebody possibly go that you have this girl who could be dead, at any time, this young girl, who had so much life ahead of her, and you've got a relative or a friend of the family or somebody related to the family taking a picture on the QT and trying to sell it to the tabloids. I've said desperate people do desperate things, and money makes us do things that we'll regret later. But man, that is such a sad story. Another sad story that I hate to see is after a good long marriage, I think it was about 8 years, Ben Affleck, Jennifer Gardner are getting a divorce. There's different reasons as to why. One reason is, Affleck is a gambler, and he's let that be known. I mean, he goes in poker tournaments, this, that, and the other. He's a serious gambler. So one of the stories is Jen couldn't put up with the gambling and his alcohol, yada, yada, yada. And that was one of the story. The other story was the fact that, he was never at home. So he was always out working, and she was raising a family. There's all kinds of speculation, but regardless, it's a sad story, and it's a shame. But can you imagine? Like, it's got to be next to impossible to have a relationship in Hollywood where both people are raking in a lot of money, both people are in demand and in want. Tied to that, the fact that you have kids that you're trying to raise. I mean, there's a lot to overcome, no question about it. That's why there's so many breakups. Couples in Hollywood never make it. And unfortunately, this looks like it's going to be another one. So, sad story there. All right. Now listen. I know you love the personal stories I come on here. I tell you about, stories about my daughter, stories about my Renaissance man. I shared some intimate things with you last week. But I'll be honest with you, there's stories I've been holding back. And I've been holding back for moral issues. Because I know if people want to attack me, if people want to say bad things about me, it's so easy for me to open that door. But it's like, the more and more I think about it, it's like life is just way too short. And, you have a choice of the way you could deal with things. And I know, I usually choose to deal with them in a glass is half full manner, which, tends to lead me to depression, rather than glass is half full and look at the bright side of things, and the positive, side of things. So I'm a pessimist. There's no issue about that. That goes without saying. But on the other side of the coin, when somebody else is involved, like, I don't want to bring them down. And I want to do everything I can in my power to bring them up. So, like, if it's a bad situation, I'm going to make the best of it that I possibly can, even if it's for 5 minutes, to make them forget about the situation that they're in and remind them, listen, it's not as bad as it seems. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Don't look at the glass half full. So I go against everything I believe when another person is involved. And in this case, it's my father. And let me give you a little background, because this isn't something I talk about all the time, because it's private. But you pay for this show. You support me. So I'm going to tell you it like it is. A couple of years ago, I don't even know where to start with this, but my parents retired to Florida many years ago. And, as you get older, things start to break down in your body. Your heart, it doesn't react the same way it did. The blood pressure starts to go up. You start to put on a little weight. I mean, the body starts breaking down after a certain period of time. Well, here's my opinion. When you're an elderly person living in Florida, of all places, the doctors have a field day with this, an absolute field day, because here's what the gimmick is. They have deals with pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies give doctors a kickback of, if you use our drugs, we'll give you a kickback. I was in the college textbook business before I got in wrestling, and that's how this worked. If a college professor decided to use my book, which meant that I would sell him 2,000 books for all the courses he was teaching in that school, well, that professor would expect a kickback from me if he used my book. So it's the same thing. All these pharmaceutical reps visit these doctors. They all want them to use different drugs. In order for the doctors to choose what drugs they're going to use, there has to be some kind of a kickback. That's how it works. So especially when you're in Florida and you're treating older people that have no clue what they're doing, they have no clue to what they're taking, then you're taking advantage of Medicare and Medicaid and all these things. It's a big work. It's like it's the biggest work on the planet. So, like the next thing I know over the years, probably, like some 3 to 5 years ago, whatever, my mother is up to this pill tray of 30 pills a day. A pill for blood pressure, pill for heart, a pill so she doesn't retain water, pill for this, pill for that. Just unbelievable. And, every hour she's got to take these pills and, she got to keep track of everything. It was ridiculous because my whole thing was, how do you even know how you really feel when you're that medicated? Like when you're that medicated, how do you know if you feel good or not? Like you don't. So at that point in time, like I could tell my mother was starting to forget names and forget things, but the whole thing was, okay, is she now getting a form of Alzheimer's, or is it all this medication she's taking? You don't know. And I honestly believed it was all the medication she was taking, because when you're mixing 20, 30 pills a day, I don't know how anybody can think straight. You can't. It's mentally impossible to be able to think with a straight head when you're on that much medication. And I think any wrestler can tell you that, whether it was a combination of prescription drugs or whatever the case may be, there's no way you could be level-headed and think straight under that influence of that much medication. So, there was a question there is it the medication? Is she, having Alzheimer's, whatever the case may be. So, like I said, the doctors, you got to go see this doctor. You got when you're an old person in Florida, you got at least 5 doctor's appointments a week. So finally now at 80 something years old, my mother's got a bad knee. She's complaining about a knee. So the doctor now says she needs a knee replacement. She's got to get her knee replaced. At 80 years old, you have to get her knee replaced. Now, I got to give you a little background on my mother so you'll appreciate this story. Growing up, my mother wore the pants in the family. Okay, it's that simple. My father, I said this a couple times, 145 pounds, soaking wet, a little man. This is a guy that had a very strict father growing up. His father used to, make him make wine in the basement for hours on end. So my father was very, 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 very submissive growing up. On the other hand, my mother had a very, strong-willed father. A Sicilian father that it was his way or the highway. If you crossed him, he never spoke to you for the rest of your life, yada, yada, yada. You know the type. So she grew up with that kind of a father. My father grew up very submissive. When the two of them got married, my mother wore the pants in the family. My father was submissive. That's the way it was my entire life. I can remember back to the days of when there weren't remote controls for TVs, and my mother would sit in her chair and not even get out of a chair to change the channel. My father had to get up to change the channel for my mother. I remember that clearly. I remember my father washing the dishes every night. I remember my father on his hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor while my mother was, in another room watching television. So that's the way it always was. So, my mother always expected my father to take care of her. So now when they start talking about this knee thing, I know in the back of my mind, my mother is also a hypochondriac. She's been a hypochondriac her whole life. Thus is the reason I'm a hypochondriac, because of her. And even if she got this operation, she was never going to be able to turn around and say, okay, I feel good now. My knee feels great. That just wasn't going to happen. If you knew my mother, even though she got the operation, it was still going to hurt. She wasn't going to do the necessary rehabilitation, and my father was going to have to wait on her hand and foot. So the writing was on the wall. But, my father being my father, oh, she's in pain. She needs the operation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so she gets the operation. Well, the first thing we notice when she gets the operation is if she was forgetting a couple of things and she was at the brink of Alzheimer's, that went from level 1 to about a level 10. Her forgetting people and forgetting names and what happened yesterday and things like that. All of a sudden it blew up. So the more research I read, it basically said, if any elderly person had any signs of Alzheimer's whatsoever, the last thing you're supposed to do is put them under. And obviously, my mother had to go under in order to have the knee operation. So with all these doctors that know everything and are prescribing a million pills, my mother, who already had Alzheimer's, they put her under, which made her condition worse. So now they go home. Now my father's living with my mother, and now waiting on a hand and foot. I mean, she's got this chair in the living room she will not get out of. She was supposed to get rehab. A guy was coming to the house giving her rehab. She would never do anything. So she got the operation on the knee. She still couldn't walk. She sits in a chair all day long. He cooks, he cleans. I mean, you name it. He's waiting around around the clock. He's absolutely 1,000% enabled her, and now she does nothing for herself. So, knowing he deals with this every day, I call him a minimum of one time a day. Sometimes two. And listen, here's my only goal when I call him. I got to make him laugh, because I know what he's going through every single day, waiting on a now it's the showering her and the clipping a toenail, whatever he's doing. And it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. So his only outlet is when his son from Colorado calls once a day. I got to do everything I possibly can to make this guy laugh. So every phone conversation, basically, Dad, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And he tells me, the progression of what's going on with my mom. And, so it's like, it's a combination of, her not wanting to do anything, her totally wanting him to take care of her. He's enabled her. She wants to be waited on hands and foot. And you never know what the level of Alzheimer's is. I mean, you don't know, because the fact of the matter is she knows who he is. She knows who I am. She knows who people are. But sometimes she'll just do things that are just so bizarre that you don't know if it's part of what's going on or if she's doing it to add to part of what's going on. Like, you don't know. So my father calls, talk to him on a daily basis, and I get the updates of what's going on every single day. So he starts telling me, like, over the matter of a couple of weeks, that here's what I find out. I told you, my father's 5'8", 145 pounds. Okay. They still share the same bed. Okay. He tells me he's got about 8 inches in the bed, 8 inches. And he's sleeping, horizontally, like at the very face of the bed. He's got 8 inches in the bed. Okay. She's sleeping and his back is to her. She's sleeping with her head lodged into her back, and she's straight across the bed horizontally with her feet hanging out the other end of the bed. So if you get the picture, he's like this on the edge of the bed. She's like this, her feet hanging off the other end of the bed. So, you know, I say to him, you can't, and listen, there are other bedrooms in the house. And I'm like, you can't sleep like that every single night. You know, why don't you move her? Why don't you nudge her? And listen, I'm going to be as nice as I can. My mother's a bigger woman. She's twice the size he is. So he can't move or nudge her. He can't move her away. And he says, you know, he goes, I try to call her name. I try to tell her to move. She doesn't answer. She's in a stupor, you know, just dead to the world. So he's like this at the very edge of the bed, and she's like this. So now he's telling me this story, this, that, and the other thing. And now he starts telling me the story that she starts bringing items like into the bed with her to sleep with. And like they're the weirdest items you've ever imagined in your life. So keep this in mind. He's like this at the edge of the bed. She's like this. Now she's bringing stuff into the bed. So the first thing she brings into the bed to sleep with is a magazine rack. So if you can imagine this and this, it's like, where does the magazine rack get wedged in there, right? So he's telling me this, and I'm trying to understand why a magazine rack. And he's got no idea. He's got no idea in the world. So I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'm assuming once she falls asleep, he'd remove the rack. You know, you would just assume that, right? Anybody would assume that. So he goes on to tell me that, well, you know, between her laying, you know, horizontal and me being vertical, and then the magazine rack in the bed, there's nowhere for me to go. And I'm like, what? He says, between the magazine rack in the bed. And I'm like, you don't take the magazine rack out of the bed? And he goes to me, he goes, no, because I'm afraid I'll wake her up. So the guy's sleeping at the edge of the bed. She's sleeping like this. The rack's got to be somewhere in here. Can you even imagine trying to sleep like this? So finally, like over a couple of days, he somehow weans her off the magazine rack for whatever reason. And we still never got to the bottom of why a magazine rack. So the next thing is in the living room. I bought this for them many, many years ago. You know, when I was a kid growing up, we had two boxers, right? Boxer dogs. And, you know, my parents used to love when you get them boxer things, little statues and little things like this. So like one year I bought like a 3-foot high ceramic boxer, you know, and I gave it to them many years ago, maybe 10. I can't even remember, right? So it's a 3-foot high boxer, if you can imagine, right? So now she starts bringing the boxer in the bed with her. And he's at the edge and she's doing this. And now a 3-foot ceramic boxer is in the bed with them. And so now he has less room in the bed than the magazine rack because the box is 2 times the size of the magazine rack. And he's not moving the boxer because he's afraid that he's going to wake her up. Now, listen, I could talk to him about this and we could say, oh, man, you know, poor mom, she's sleeping with a ceramic box. But like, what is that going to do for anybody? So, you know, of course, I get him on the phone. I start, you know, lovingly just tearing him limb from limb that number one, he can't ask her to move to her side of the bed, God forbid. And number two, now into this equation, we've added a 3-foot ceramic boxer right smack in the middle of the bed. And he continues to this day, the box is still in the bed. I don't know how he's going to wean this thing out because there's no way she's not going to know what's missing. You know, the magazine rack, he was able to get out of there because she forgot about it. This thing is pretty big. So this is what goes on at the house, and there's so many. Listen, the stories I get on a daily basis are unbelievable. And like I said, please understand, this is not, she's not at the point she don't know anybody. She doesn't recognize anybody. She don't know her own son. It's not that. But if you knew her and if you knew the background, it's almost like, you know what? You don't know how much of a work this is, and it isn't. Because, there are times she's perfectly fine, and there are times she's dragging a ceramic boxer into the bed. And I know that's how the disease works, so I'm not making light of it. But my point is, if I didn't show my father the lighter side of this and have fun with it and kid around with it, I don't know what he'd do. So that's what I do. That's the way I tend to deal with that. I broke the ice with the boxer story. Let's see how this goes. Let's see how this goes over. I'm trying to get my father on the show. We had him on the show once, through the phone line. He called in. He has a camera on his computer, and I'm trying to explain to him how to use the camera and how to use Skype so I could actually bring him on the show. But that's a process with anybody. Listen, when you're over a certain age and you're trying to teach somebody how to use a computer, it just ain't going to happen. So I'm working on that. This way I could bring him here. We can get it all out in the open. We could all talk about it. We could all try to find solutions to the problem. But let me make this perfectly clear. I love my parents. But if I did not poke fun at the situation, then it's just gloom and doom, and nobody's gonna wake up with a smile on their face, and that's what needs to happen. So listen, that's it for this edition of Chicken Necks. To my paying customers, who I always thank, so much for supporting me and my family through the show. I want to remind you again, Amazon. If you buy anything on Amazon, please. Go through the website, vincerussobrand.com. It helps us out. If you want to try Amazon Prime, that helps us out as well. Got a bunch of good interviews in the cans for you guys. I got to figure out the rotation, but, we've got Bubba, we've got Vampiro, we've got Gunner, we've got Blue Meanie. We have so many things coming on the horizon. I'm bringing R.D. Reynolds back on the show, The Death of WCW. What that interview was like the first time. He's coming back on because I asked him to, because I really want to settle everything with R.D. He's a really, really great guy. But listen, everybody, tomorrow's the 4th of July. Tomorrow's the time for family, friends. Enjoy yourself. Forget your worries. Forget your woes, if even for just one day. Sunday, me and Pastor Dave will be back on here for About Life. So you'll be able to see that on the YouTube channel. So listen, everybody, have a great holiday. Until then, I'll catch you on the replay.
The preceding presentation was brought to you by the Realm Network.